Welcome to Unemergence, a podcast on what it takes to be a human being. I'm Laura Sagan, your host and a fellow human being. Today, I'm delighted to present to you a conversation I had with Molly Hickey, a scientist in the field of psychedelics and neuropharmacology. This conversation was had in Peru, in Pisac Sacred Valley. Actually, a day before, Molly has boarded her plane to take her to the Amazon forest to participate in a study of ayahuasca, a traditional plant medicine of Shipibo tribe of the Amazon forest, in its healing potential in veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. This was a fascinating conversation, which I hope you enjoy. We cover topics ranging from mental health, altered states of consciousness, mental illnesses, psychosis, neurodivergence, amongst a few others. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. If any specific part has resonated with you, feel free to share it. Feel free to reach out to either me or Molly. I really hope you enjoy the conversation today. Today, I am excited to interview Molly Hickey, who is an artist and a neuropharmacologist who is, through her research and work, bringing the value of psychedelics into improving overall well-being of human beings. She is also a partner at the company called Psychedelic, which provides a psychedelic consulting services. And here today, we are in, again, a makeshift studio in Pisac, Peru. So if you hear some strange noises, you know why. So Molly, if you don't mind doing a proper introduction and an overview of what you do, what other things and projects that and I know that you're involved in, your artistic pursuits, as well, of course, your research around psychedelics.
Thank you. So the background is that I studied pharmacology and found myself leaving university equipped with this degree, plus a history of being patient of the mental health service since I was 14. And then also with an intrigue about altered states of consciousness and psychoactive compounds. And found that these three things converged on this interest of whether psilocybin could be offered to people as an alternative to antidepressants that are normally prescribed in the status quo at the moment, at the time, 2019. And then I did some research and found that there was a startup organization in London called Compass Pathways, and I wrote to them and basically just fangirling that someone was doing this work to make this compound prescribable. And then they wrote back saying, hey, why don't you apply for an internship? And then I did. And then I joined this company, which at the time was somewhere between 10 and 15 people. And I joined a preclinical research group as part of the company of 4 scientists, and spent the next 4 years working with them, having extraordinary experience considering where I was in my career of writing briefing packages for the FDA about the scheduling of psilocybin and organizing projects around exploring different effects of psilocybin in different models of conditions. So seeing if it might have effects for Alzheimer's or the conditions psilocybin might be beneficial for. And I also was looking into drug-drug interactions with SSRIs and maybe how to mitigate any of those, and also the role of the immune system in psilocybin, sort of alongside lots of other supporting projects. And then developed this feeling that one of the biggest hurdles to psilocybin having value for people was really just the general understanding and awareness of not only what's happening in the research space, but also the product of the research itself. And lots of people are interested. It's great that when I meet people, it often was intriguing that I was working in this kind of space that's emerging and blooming. Did also mean I had a lot of conversations over and over again. So I compiled what I found into talks and making infographics and hoping to sort of disperse this information in a accessible manner and So as part of that, I've been working with Set and Setting a little bit, and which is a communications organization that largely works with charities that are working on sharing this sort of information for legislative and general awareness purposes. Another organization that's looking to apply such research to plant medicine work, like with the Shipipo medicine practitioners.
Yes, because you're also right now literally flying out tomorrow to the Amazon forest to contribute to the study around ayahuasca veterans and PTSD symptoms. And that's super interesting.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I haven't done this sort of hands-on work with people before. There's a charity called Heroic Hearts that sends veterans or supports and finances veterans coming and receiving treatment with Shipipo, curanderos, and maestras. We're using that as an opportunity to look at some biological measures and neurological measures of neurological activity before and after they go on and enroll in these retreats. The hope is to really use science as a means of communication to show, like, to build respect for this medicine that has been preserved through these communities. The Shipipo people is really remarkable and extremely extraordinary and feels very advanced technology, but is completely outside of the realm, really, of what we've managed to establish through our kind of step-by-step of the discipline of science in the Western world, of using the evidence that we have to build a hypothesis, to interrogate the hypothesis. They've preserved something really remarkable, and so hopefully it can reveal a lot about the human system and what its potential, like what the potential is for healing by celebrating and exploring these technologies.
I hope that by the time that this episode is going to air, that I can actually provide the link to the show notes, or at least to point people to the direction to find out more about that work, because that's really remarkable.
NIA is an organization which is the research group, been around for a wee while, but it's another non-for-profit. So we kind of ride on the back of other charities to gather data. The aim is really to bridge these worlds and to hopefully, build respect for the Shipipo medicine, as well as to inform how we can progress in the world of Western medicine and bridge these two things together.
Well, that's very fitting, because it's exactly what the podcast is aiming to do, is to bridge the kind of the learnings, the ancient learnings, and through psychology, through awareness into the modern science, so you can kind of speak to both markets, because there are people who are kind of really fluent in this ancient learnings and plant medicine. It's like, oh yeah, it's fine, I understand. And there are people who are like, no, but science doesn't say that it works. Science, and it's they're kind of a little bit more adamant. So it's really great to hear that there's more things like that.
Yeah. Really, my expertise is more in the science side than the plant medicine, but I've been curious and exposed myself to some of that world. And like I said in the talk about how it's kind of become a religion or an authority in itself, this science. I see a friction between, like, as you've mentioned, this, so that if I can't see it and measure it, it doesn't exist. And then the other school of thought maybe saying, like, we're blinding ourselves by limiting ourselves to seeing with the tools that we've developed to measure things in the world of science here. But it is extraordinary where we're at in terms of being able to measure brain activity in the way we can. And when I've spoken to people who've worked with psilocybin in this context, like I'm about to do previously, they said that the shamans are kind of laughing at them because they're trying to look at how ayahuasca works by looking at the brain. And I can totally see where they're coming from. They're like, you're trying to understand ayahuasca by looking at the brain, come on. But then at the same time, something does happen in the brain. Yeah. So it's like, but there's little sprinkles of what's going on in both camps. I also believe what the shamans are working with and what the scientists are working with, or the biologists are working with, are reflections of the same thing. It's just from different perspectives. So hopefully we can find where there's correspondence and actually have more of a 360 perspective. My work has been in this biotech space, and like in biological psychiatry conferences and stuff, and not in the plant medicine space. And I sort of like swimming in both of those worlds, though, has exposed me to the frictions that lie between the two.
I wonder, how is it your work has influenced your relationship with your mental health, with your mental state, and the kind of the challenges that you mentioned you experienced? How did they got shaped? How were they shaped by the work that you're doing, and have they been impacted, or they haven't changed? I presume they have changed.
I was working unintentionally with mushrooms before I started looking into this research. I would like to comment on how we think about mental health, and you know, you said about when it's not working properly, and I feel like you're being tactful with saying like mental ill health, or you know, how we talk about mental health and illness, and how I've come.
I was trying to find a word that would encapsulate everything. That is like when you're mentally not feel that you're not well, when you're mentally not healthy. So yeah, in that context.
Totally. What I've come to think, when there's something, what I experienced as mental illness was actually a response to something that the symptoms were really a signpost giving me information about my system. I felt like the way that the treatments that I experienced in the world of psychiatry didn't give me that perspective. I felt like the symptoms were the problem, and that they were the issue, and that sure, there's trauma underlying them or whatever, but that the best way to address it is to address the symptoms, because they're what's holding me back in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously I went into this work because it was like trying to understand myself. And I think that that's interesting, that it is also,
I think that
comes
really
under
awesome.
the category of psychedelic, you know, to look at the mind.
I think that's a really awesome thing that you did, that you actually went to get to know yourself and you went into science. I think these days a lot of people are like, I want to get to know myself. I'm going to go sit on top of the mountain and meditate, or I'm going to take a lot of plant medicine. You're like, no, I want to understand it. But it just so happens that it does involve some plant medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I also was kind of secular. Like I wouldn't have necessarily gone and sat on the mountain either. So it was my strategy, and also feeling like I had this fear that I didn't study art. I studied science because I thought that would be the thing that would mean that I would be able to have a job, or it kind of running on this notion that it's like me versus the world. And so I've got to make myself useful, or I'm not allowed to follow my heart. And I've come to feeling like maybe all of these beliefs that I had embraced and was cultivating had led me to not be honoring what I loved. I was good at science. Just somewhere along the lines, like the kind of calling of my heart saying, like, I'm really hurting, you really need to give me attention. Whether it's just because of experiences that I was having, or that I didn't know how to respond to my heart. And so I didn't understand the human system at all. This is why I found that taking treatments that I believe now also like disconnected me from my heart further, allowed me to get on with doing all the stuff that I could do, like studying. Like I couldn't really go to school if I was not around people in which I could put on my social mask performance, or like kick into gear. I was just crying all of the time. And I remember like trying to do my schoolwork and like looking at my arm, and I just I couldn't make my arm do anything. Like I was so disconnected from my body, I couldn't function. And then I felt like taking these medications was helping, because it kind of made me forget I couldn't hear all these signals. I could get on with the way that I was trying to, instead of like maybe changing strategy. And then going into a company that was very overtly focused on mental health, and generally, you know, especially at the beginning, had people who were pretty open-minded and tended to have walked a similar route, looking to heal, and then finding that some strategies, I mean, I think that one of our founders in particular was very open that he healed himself with MDMA and psilocybin from anxiety. It was in that environment that I came off of the antidepressants, because I felt like I could be open about the fact that this was something that I wanted to do. I never intended to be on them forever, but I thought it's because of being in an institution where there's deadlines that are like one size fits all, that I needed to kind of keep up with that strategy. But I also feel like a lot of doctors are hypochondriacs. I used to find understanding how the body works empowering for hypochondria, but also fueling of it. There's this thing with the world of psychiatry becoming kind of dogmatic. I noticed that sometimes when I would speak with my psychotherapist towards the end of our relationship, I felt like he was trying to, again, this is not necessarily what he was doing, but this is how I felt.
Your perception.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make it any less real.
Thank you. Well, I mean, what is real, really? Exactly. I have to say, I
that is your truth, and it's perfectly valid.
Yeah, I felt like he was trying to kind of reinforce that I had received trauma and I needed to heal, and that I felt like I was like steps behind and I needed to just like do all of this work to catch up. And what really reframed the whole thing was the idea that all of this, what might have been referred to as trauma or relational wounding or whatever, was actually part of the healing. It was a belief that helped me, was that maybe I had arrived in this incarnation with that wounding, and that those experiences supported me in becoming aware of the fact that I have that and is actually on the road to healing them. Like, it wasn't like I earned them in this, like, through this trauma. But this is obviously like after I've sat with quite a few psychedelics, and it's the reason for putting it into this framework really is so that this sort of healing or this medicine or this drug can be available to people who would not really be comfortable if the doctor wasn't recommending it. Also addressing the fact there's room for abuse in an unregulated space, and again, like, it's particularly important with something that can put people in altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, especially people dealing with addictions. But at the same time, I'm aware that they actually help dealing people with addictions. They help them dealing with whatever that they're trying to numb by adopting certain addictive behaviors.
Exactly.
So
I think that the antidepressants were not, like, I wasn't like I had an addiction to them, but it was kind of serving the same role of, and to be honest, I was smoking like loads of weed throughout all of my teenage and late teenage and university years when I was also taking these drugs. And this is another reason why I wanted to see if we could make like a treatment that's kind of a one-time deal, because there's like the psychology of a drug every day just to like do the normal stuff, which felt kind of like I was incapable. Also, I would miss them all of the time. Like I would forget to take them, and then it would be like a whole thing of actually being worse than if I hadn't taken them at all, like this kind of withdrawal moment. And then also that these clinical trials that are testing them, they're not testing them for a teenager that's taking them for like years and smoking weed and missing them every now and again and whatnot. But I do want to comment that I was not okay emotionally before I started smoking weed, because I know that there's like associations between those things.
yeah, what caused what? Yeah.
There's a good reason to believe that the psychedelics are getting underneath, allowing people to see what they're running from, perhaps.
The actual cause rather than treating the symptoms, which is what probably more kind of the medication that you were talking about you have to take every day. It's like you're treating the symptoms, because if you were treating the root cause, then the root cause is eventually would go away.
Yeah, my concern is that treating the symptoms makes it harder to access. Like
It's more like symptoms, like a sign.
Yeah, that's how I see it.
It's like your body or your emotional body and your physical body, both giving you signals. It's like, hey, there's something wrong. We're like, no, shut up, I don't want to listen to you.
Yeah, exactly. It's seeing the symptom as the problem. Like I was saying on our walk, it's the way that the drug development program is built. It seems like the best that we can do. We've got to give justification that this drug is going to support people enough that we can justify putting it into clinical trial, which is expensive and also interrupting people's treatment plans and potentially putting them at risk because you don't know what the drug does yet. Yeah, test the drug in all of these models that are replicating symptoms, and then, it addresses that symptom. Therefore, we can justify putting it in people. And so that's like the foundation of how drugs are developed. And the whole DSM-5, which is like the book, the handbook of psychiatry, is categorizing symptoms as conditions. So yeah, that's good, so that you kind of have a kind of idea of how to respond to a person when they arrive. Like, okay, this worked for the last person that I saw who had the same set of symptoms, so I'm going to replicate that treatment for you. You know, there's logic behind why it was built, but at the same time, it's kind of meant that there's this, oh, I have these symptoms because I have this condition. And I also was like, oh, I can't help it because my neurobiology is different. Like, I'm kind of stuck like this now. This is why I take these drugs. And there's logic that can underpin this. It means that treating the symptoms is treating the condition. Mm-hmm. And then if we treat the symptoms, then the person is moved out of that diagnostic category. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, woohoo!
They might have lost
we treated them.
In that process. Like, actually, that was the sign of that, maybe the condition, but what is under why the condition has come about. It's no longer clear.
My concern is that we stagnate people, like in not listening to those signposts, but also on a societal level as an extrapolation out of that. If there's something in how we're living that we're being, like our body's communicating to us that something's not okay, we're just like, no, I'm just going to keep doing it as doing things as I am. And a lot of people come out of the psychedelic therapies and seem to create changes in their lives, which is also possibly like one of the concerns.
The war on drugs.
The war on drugs, basically, because people were changing the way that they wanted to live.
And I guess they were changing some views that they had in certain institutions as well that weren't exactly helpful.
Yes, exactly. At the moment, it's like people are put on antidepressants and then go on a waiting list and then have therapy. And I feel like that could be actually creating such a distance that the therapy itself becomes less. It's like you've got to dig so much more to get to what it is that needs to be expressed and released.
By the sounds of it, it makes the therapy work harder.
Yeah, and then it means that, the therapy is less effective, therefore it's less justifiable to fund it.
I found it really beautiful what you said, actually. In your own personal journey, you kind of looked at your symptoms as the way. It's like you were, quote unquote, given that those experiences, the wounds, the body that reacts in a certain way, because that was your way to get to where you are, which is, well, at the forefront of the research in psychedelics, which is like now having a renaissance and helping so many people along the way. I'd love for you to share some of the maybe changes that you have seen and then observed within the studies that you were part, that you were contributing to, in the people, in the subject, in the so-called subject.
The best example is from the patient representative or patient consultant that we have at Compass, who was part of the initial open label study at Imperial College. And he spoke about how he'd done all of the treatments and everything and been depressed for years. And one of the things that he was kind of stuck with was the grief of his mother. There were many things in his life that he kind of was holding up as like reasons that he couldn't be happy. And one of them was the death of his mother. And he said that when he had the psilocybin, he was able to recognize that he was holding on to that grief or the pain because he felt like it was like kind of holding on to his mother to honor the closeness of that relationship. The grief was honoring the relationship. And that during the experience, it was revealed to him that that really honoring his mother was to love his life. And I've heard people talk about with eating disorders, they suddenly had this realization like, oh my God, am I so... Like they felt like it was almost comically stupid that all of these creatures are keeping themselves alive and I have the opportunity to feed myself when I choose not to. And sort of sometimes people say that the psilocybin can be quite cheeky, seeing how we've been kind of narrow-minded or like holding on to one way of looking at things because it's kind of been ironically convenient and self-serving to a part of ourselves. I personally have felt with the psilocybin, I was able to approach topics that previously I'd like, if it went near them, I just kind of had an emotional breakdown. It was just so much physical pain. That's like the crazy thing about depression, or in my experience. It's like so much physical pain that it felt like, why are you here? I don't know why. But being able to see what they've given me, those experiences, feels really cool. And like physically, I'm taking my back and stuff like that. And a time when, like the first time that I had psilocybin, again, like not with the intention of healing, but I was in Southeast Asia and I was kind of feeling like a bit of grief that I wasn't able to express to my aunt, who's also like, who had lived out in this part of the world. Like, oh my God, I kind of get it. The landscape that she'd lived in, and wish that I could share it with her. And then I was like, oh my God, the fact that I am here and like I am sharing it with it, like I am connected with her for being here. It's mostly about reframing stories, I think, and like letting go of stories. I heard one woman referring to this idea that like everyone's got a mental health story with a kind of anger. Like, for example, someone being sexually assaulted once is not the same as having repeat incidences with a close family member or something. And she, she was very emphatic about this, that it's not fair to say that everyone has a story. And I thought maybe it's when we feel that an experience or recognize an experience isn't ubiquitous across the population that we start feeling like it's very personal and holding on to it more. Like shared traumas maybe feel less like ingrained in our personality and like who we are and our identity than ones that feel like they're like unique or that they're personal. Holding on to that story is part of the pain. And then I don't know about you, but when I've drank ayahuasca, it's like I've almost had like my whole life flash before my eyes and been like, oh my God, it's just literally a big drama that I'm playing out. Obviously, it comes with lots of questions of what's really going on here.
And in your experience, do you think that people, they do want to hold on to that individuality of their trauma? Because I think then it kind of gives a card called get out of jail card.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, my trauma is so unique that it can't be healed. And therefore, I can still be the victim. And as my therapist, we have an ongoing conversation about the victim persecutor, the victim triangle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
I am, yeah.
But it's kind of like also by holding on to your trauma and not really looking for different alternative therapies and actual psychotherapy, it kind of gives you permission to not have the agent, to not feel like you have the agency of your life. Because I think we always have agency. It's just sometimes we deny ourselves that agency because it gives us permission to not do the scary.
This is another outcome of the DSM-5 thing where it's like, oh, I have these symptoms because I have this condition, or like that the condition becomes very much part of the identity. And as you're saying, this reason that can remove that agency, I think. I feel like it's good to have compassion for the fact that there are changes in neurobiology. There is a limit in cognitive flexibility, not because this person's not trying, but because there isn't the BDNF or the machinery in the brain so abundantly to carve new avenues of thought. It can be quite contentious thing to say sometimes that it is within your power, but that like to change.
It is, and I know that I said it. It is and it isn't, because it's also, and that is kind of more in alignment to the Sapolsky school of thought, is that we don't have free will. And is that we're dictated by what we had for breakfast, like our ability to make decisions in a certain day is dictated by what we had for breakfast. Have we had breakfast? What our week was like? And did we experience high level of stress? And then going back weeks and maybe years later and then looking and unpeeling the traumas of someone who was going through a traumatic experience as a child, like you mentioned some of them, they are less able to exercise their so-called free will to make the hard decision and face the trauma and face their fears. But I feel that psychedelics actually is kind of like wedging that in between and say, no, that actually gives that perspective to look at your life from a different angle and seeing something that has been unseen before.
Yeah, I mean, totally. It addresses that change in neurobiology. That's why I think it's so amazingly important to offer this to people who are being only able to see things from one perspective for like often, decades, to even have the experience of seeing things from a shifted state of consciousness or like a shifted perspective reveals that there are different ways of looking at things. And it also creates changes in the neurobiology that are like the opposite of that state of like low neuroplasticity or low ability to have cognitive flexibility, like increasing the capacity to form new paths as well as affecting how one perceives the world. By like removing the lens and then putting it back on,
then you become aware that you had the lens to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I see sort of the effect of like the default mode network suppression. It is really an exercise, having a mind. And it's like the most amazing tool. I think it's like Joe Rogan said about you can build a house with a hammer or hit yourself in the dick. Like this is really, it's really wild. And like each of our minds is different as well and all have different capacities. It's just important to try and not be judgmental and be curious about how it works.
I asked you, so before we started recording, I asked you a question is when I mentioned the podcast and you got very excited about it, that it's a podcast about what it takes to be a human being. And you started giving the answer that I was like, oh, keep it for the recording. So I'm going to ask this question again, is what has sparked your curiosity around the podcast, around contributing to it?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess how your perspective on what it takes to be a human being has shifted through the years that you have been involved first in studying human biology overall, and then moving into the psychedelic research and how that shaped your perception, your perspective of what it takes to be a human.
Okay. I feel like the malfunctions or the illnesses, different states of health, and also psychedelics are both revealing about the human system. This question that you ask is one that I often also ask a little bit about what do you think it means to be a human? What do you think it means to be alive? And I'm surprised how often people respond to, like, look at me like I'm insane. And like, why? Like, I've never thought of that before. And interestingly, I wonder if really getting stuck in that loop of like asking, why am I alive, can be a lead to feeling very lost in the world, like not having that sense of purpose, perhaps because I don't feel like the reasons to be alive that I was introduced to via school / normal capitalistic culture fulfilled that. Like I would feel like this doesn't feel like it's why I'm alive. And then in exploring psychedelics, it's like a tail, like a snake eating its own tail in some ways, that is because I had these experiences that I went into this work to try and make sure that people who, especially if they're teenagers, who express distress, receive a treatment that allows them to really be facilitated in healing.
Just you as you are.
Yeah.
What do you think it takes to be a human being? What do you think it involves? So you can tie in your work into your answer, or your art. I saw some of your paintings and some of your drawings, and they're you mentioned you never studied art, and I think that's what makes them so unique, because you have developed your own style. You didn't necessarily spend important hours, days and weeks in studying certain styles and then imitating. It came from something so deep within you that it was a unique expression of the unique person that you are.
Well, on that, I mean, I ended up moving away from art at school because there was a right and a wrong of how to do it. And I would get told off for like doodling in my sketchbook and stuff like this and not just doing the exercise. And I was like, come on, like art is, I think, all about exploring and experimenting, and as is science. So that's why I think the two are what my mind has been drawn to. What I think it takes to be a human being is probably curiosity. Because we're experiencing something, and to really be requires to be curious about what one is experiencing in that moment of being, rather than just like doing stuff, which has also prescribed perhaps We say sometimes about it's like, oh, the universe is experiencing itself, and that's what we're experiencing. Then it's probably a curiosity that's driven us to be here. And I loved when someone said to me, if only we could see how many souls are lined up to come to this earth in one perception. And it's a roller coaster, but that's what being a human being is.
That narrative actually I share very much in terms of like the souls lining up. It's a helpful reminder to be like, yeah, that's the opportunity. I'm going to seize it and I'm going to experience and feel all there is to feel, because that is a unique opportunity to be human, to be conscious, to be alive, and to live, to feel. Because I think that's our unique talent as human beings, is to feel. That if we feel pain, okay, we're able to feel pain. Mm-hmm. And that's why the numbing it's kind of, it takes away the humanity. Is it the humanity itself?
I saw a nice segue, in what you said about being curious about what these symptoms might be indicating, as opposed to like when we export that advice. I mean, I was taken to a doctor initially, with well intentions. They basically told me what it meant that I was feeling in a certain way. That diagnosis meant that I got help or was kind of recognized in some way. To be really curious and without bias on what this whole system is and what it means when things are seemingly unhealthy is the ultimate way of being able to see. Like there's a line from, I think it's called Daniel Tamalo. It's what we judge, we can never truly understand. And I sometimes think this even when we're talking about like health and mental health and good and bad thoughts even. I mean, in many cultures, what would be diagnosed as psychosis is treated in a very different manner and then becomes a tool that the whole community can benefit from.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, people to those who are not familiar with what we're referring to is that which I think what you're referring to is that people who are psychotic or experience psychotic attacks, I think that's also another way to refer to it, is that they become shamans.
Yeah.
They become shamans, and then they help heal the community because the whole attitude towards the state of mind is completely different.
Yes, or it's perceived as a tool.
It's actually also the book I read, Anatomy of the Epidemic. It's written by the psychopharmacologist. And it looks at different conditions and how they're treated differently. So if you're medicating a child with ADHD, given Ritalin, versus therapy, and see how that child then flourishes with the right support, with the right therapy, without any medication. And then is that our entire schooling system, our work system is developed for people. Okay, we go to universities, we sit still, we sit in one place, but some people are not made for it. Like I know that I'm not the person to sit still and then focus unless I go into my hyper focus. But it's like kind of, you're not made for the world as it was made. Many people have to now, with availability of information, they find out that actually they are normal. It's just they've been measuring themselves against the wrong peer group. It's like, no, yes, you did. A lot of my friends have ADHD, are ADHD. And it's like, that's not, for me, it's normal.
Can I ask why you rephrased from have ADHD to are ADHD?
Because I personally think that ADHD is like a superpower.
I've heard many, like human 2.0.
Yeah, you're able to think about so many things at the same time. You're able to bridge different concepts, as if you were taking psilocybin. It's like their creativity comes from connecting two seemingly undisconnected points. Yes. And I find that labeling someone that they have ADHD, it means like, oh, they have a disease. I don't even like the D in the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because it's the way I look at it, it's not a disorder. Yeah. It's like the brain is wired differently. So you have a differently wired brain. There's nothing wrong with it. It is just different from what we were taught to believe as normal. And that's why I myself, neurodivergent, I don't like looking at it as a disease or disorder. It's like, no, and through therapy, actually, I've learned how to harness it. And then hypersensitivity, great. It means that I have great taste in music and I'm a good cook. And I can do things at the same time, multiple things at the same time. So don't look at it as
the style is, I mean, if we imagine that we're functioning in a community or in any organization, one style of human mind is not giving us the diversity to really navigate this complicated world. And I've had a theory, it's all on a scale of how much we might be in our mind or in our body. And by mind, I kind of mean like able to perceive the world that's maybe less physical. And in our body, I mean like more physical. And perhaps psychosis is right on one side of the spectrum. Then maybe further along the scale. And the reason I was saying it's like a graph, it's kind of like a bell curve. Yes, exactly. And then ADHD maybe is somewhere towards the material or body side. And then you probably have most people. And I'm sure that there's like what we recognize as dyslexia and dyspraxia kind of lie in there as well. I think that even like people who can be considered to be very simple, quite often it's like really amazingly refreshing to have conversations with people who have that sort of mind, in the same way that it's amazingly refreshing to have conversations with people on the other side of the spectrum. And it's like both of these, you know, we're maybe mostly functioning in this world that we agree on, like the material plane, but it doesn't mean that what's detected or people are sensitive to on that other side of like the psychosis is not just as valid / affecting this realm as we might generally consider.
I think it's also because it's outliers as well. That's why they're not considered normal. But what is normal? Like the normal person, it just doesn't, I keep saying normal, but what is normal? No, really normal person doesn't exist. It's like this average statistical person doesn't exist. They're always outliers. But because we're not really exposed to those outliers, we tend to treat them as freaks. It's like, oh, there's something wrong with you. You have to medicate it because you have to be like the rest of us.
Because it is probably, if I'm like going with that hypothesis that all of these different, the spectrum is important for our community, the most people lie in the middle. And it's valuable for most people to lie in the middle. You know, like things probably work better if not everyone is lying at one side and not everyone is lying at the other.
But then we would have a very different world. Then our world would be designed in a very different way. If everyone would have some sort of psychotic inclinations, our world would be functioning completely differently. We don't know what kind of world would that be, right?
I really hope you can come to my storytelling thing later. Yes. It would definitely be functioning differently. How do you think it would be functioning differently?
Oh, I need to think about that. I would prefer to live in that world than the world that we're living in right now.
Would you rather, what about if you lived in this world, but the way your gifts were celebrated?
I think my life would be a lot easier, at least the first 30 years of my life. I'm now turning 35. So the first 30 years, just me understanding and how I don't fit in and why don't I fit into the normality of our world. It would just be easier if that information was readily available. But I keep thinking about your question about, I think we would live in so much more creative world. There would be a lot more art, a lot more music, a lot more. It's like the story fact about it. When Van Gogh painted the Starry Night, scientists then studied the certain patterns within the brushes, the brush strokes. What they discovered is that he depicted turbulence, which is one of the most complicated concepts out there in physics. And and he made those paintings when he was in that psychotic state of mind, and he was able to depict it. The paintings that he made outside the psychotic state doesn't exhibit the same. So he was able to capture the uncapturable with that state of mind that is considered weird and was judged for. And it still is now medicated rather than understood.
So maybe when he was in that psychotic state and he was maybe more into mind, like I say, I just mean like kind of out of the body, maybe into like the whatever awarenesses, he was kind of able to access like the metasphere. I sort of see it sometimes as we're each websites, like your website, our website, whatever. And then maybe when we have an altered states of consciousness, With the psychedelic in particular, because it's suppressing the dominance of the default mode network, that all of those stories about like who I am, the book of who I am, like being suppressed in its dominance over our awareness, means that we can access the internet, the whole internet and all of the websites. It's the same with dreams, which are another altered states of consciousness. All of this information that we have access to, but we have beliefs that we don't have access to it. And therefore...
Yeah, what's your take on dreams?
I feel like it's plugging into like a different channel. Yeah, access to some sort of information that maybe benefits us when we're in waking life. But I also feel like this is a bit of a dream.
The life that we're living.
Yeah, it's
we're
just
gonna wake
more
up
consistent.
and like, whoa, that was a dream.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes felt like humans, it's like we're kind of like screaming little piglets, like rolling around in the mud, like came into the existence in this version of, this like user interface, this world, and then it's like, let's make some reason for us being here because we've been disconnected from whatever that reason actually is, made all these structures that give us a right or a wrong so that we can be right, but it also means that we can be wrong, and it's just got way out of hand. Or equally that it's with this thing of like the universe like looking in the mirror, wanted to experience itself. Universe, I always like highlighting that word is like one song. We say like, oh, it's the sound of the universe. And it's like split into different frequencies. And it's kind of like I was alone. And then I was like, oh, you know what? It'd be really cool to have a pal to hang out with or, have a hug or tell a joke to or whatever. And so I created this pal. And then I forgot like why I created them. And now I've just got this housemate that I kind of get annoyed with every now and again. And, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like that, but like on a whole 8 billion, I don't know how many people we are, but like spectrum or something like this. And if I can circle back, tangent back to what you're saying about when we're talking about this, like what's referred to as neurodiversity, maybe different natures rise and fall in different times in humanity, not just as a symptom or a product of the way that the world is, but also because it's what the world is, that how the world is evolving. Like it literally is what drives the world evolving. So, for example, we could say, oh, there's many more people who what's described as ADHD resonates with or come under that diagnostic category. Oh, that could be because it's recognized more, it's talked about more, doctors are sending out more questionnaires, or there's more overstimulation, like the way that we're educating people is TikTok or whatever. But maybe it's because the world is about to evolve into this one where more people have ADHD because that's the state that we need to be at. Maybe in the past fewer people had ADHD because that wasn't serving the world then. Maybe you or I are like, we're premature, like in that, and therefore creating the shift. But yeah, who knows? Maybe it's just literally is how the world evolves. People's minds shifting, and there's always teething issues.
I certainly noticed like there's a leaps in my friends who do have it. I know that I'm on the spectrum, a bit less ADHD, but more towards autism. And this is the narrative that is basically like now one of the foundation of my therapy as well. So it's like if I'm explaining something, my therapist is like, oh, people who are neurodiverse. So that's kind of like I tried getting diagnosed, but it was a very complicated process. And I was like, I don't have patience for that. And what I've observed in people that interact is like they're a lot more creative. Mm-hmm. They require less words somehow. It's just like, or rather that the words are insufficient to explain what is it that they mean. And they're looking through other ways to express themselves. And that's where the creativity comes from, and that's the unique style that they develop. So that could be a very hopeful image of the world, that people with, there would be more people moving towards more. Not that there's better way of being, but it's just a way of being that I understand better.
In a world where variety serves, there's always going to be people who are not having the average experience.
I think that invites us all to go into the present moment, because if we are in the present moment, if we are aware of who we are if we're moving slow, if we're not trying to put people in boxes and perceiving each other truly as we are right here, right now, I perceive you as you are. Yes, you were here on the premise of, I've learned about your research and what you do and I got curious. But really, if I perceive you as you are, not put you in boxes, there's no need to be normal or abnormal. You are just as you are. And then we perceive each other fully as human beings as we are in that moment. It would make it a lot more complex for certain structures to exist, but then it kind of makes me question, but then do we need those structures? Or maybe those structures can be redesigned to fit more of a being present, being with each other fully in that moment.
Let's come back to the curiosity as well. I wondered, have you ever been in an organization that started small and has grown?
No.
Because I've spoken to quite a few people who've had experiences that mirrored mine, of it being like this accepted thing that as an organization grows, it becomes less accommodating, less personal. Have you encountered that piece of information where they looked at different ratios of brain structure sizes in primates and looked at the sizes of their social groups and then extrapolated that to humans and felt like the number of people the human brain works with is something like 100 or
150.
You know this. Like, is it that we just need to accept this and go back, or is it possible for us to function like as a global tribe? And you're talking about social structures and how they're hard to accommodate this, just accepting each other as we are. Can we evolve towards making those social structures work? And like, what would it need, do you think? Or should we just revert to 150?
It needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of work from each and individual person. And the work, it's a so-called simple stuff. It's the meditation. It's the looking after yourself. It's the accepting, first and foremost, actually, before all of that, is accepting responsibility over your life. Accepting that there's nobody else in charge. Yes, I've had trauma. You've had trauma. Everyone had the traumatic experience to various degrees and the experiences that shaped us. Understanding that there's a choice between the extent that you allow those experiences to influence who you are right here, right now, because those experiences are in the past. Yes, they shaped you, but who you are from this moment on, as you walk out from this door, is completely up to you. It's up to you. The moment that more people who are capable to realize, because there are people who are really with deep traumatic experiences, they don't have the luxury of doing that work that you and I are doing. And I think the more people who are capable of doing that, the more of that work they're doing, the bigger that number is going to be. And 150, it's how many people we can actually remember. Okay. Because once we go, our brain is capable. But again, our brain can evolve. It has evolved over time.
And I wonder how different that number is between neuronormative, neurotypical.
Yeah, that's a good question to remember. But I think that would invite more of a global community, and we would understand actually we are all the same. It doesn't, and all this wars that we are fighting, all these things that are happening in the world that makes no sense. It's kind of like more and more people will start realizing that, including the people in charge, making certain decisions on that.
And I think this is also why I've just going back to like the Shipipo healing and the motivation / justification of doing this kind of work of validating for those who see science as the authority, because there's also a lot of, faith is kind of a very healing part of that, or a very important part of that therapy. And arguably, like, faith is the ultimate healer in terms of the power of the mind. When people say, like, if you believe, like the placebo effect, if you believe something is going to heal you, then it will. Like, this is the need to prove things. Does that undermine the medicine itself? How's it going to change the medicine? Even they're opening this kind of tradition, or the traditional medicine, to people of the West. It's like the best way to heal yourself is to heal your bully. And
your bully.
Yeah, if we're really like, what all is one thing, quantum physics appreciators, then I can't heal myself without healing you, and I can't heal you without healing myself. Like, accepting everyone as they are. So I suppose I also need to accept that I don't feel comfortable, perhaps, with you being as you are. Like, so I remove myself, or this thing of trying to work out, like, we are all one. And okay, if I'm not accepting something in you, then it's my shadow that I need to, I'm not accepting a part of myself. I don't know. I'm trying to like make sense of this whole thing of if people are bothering me, is it that I'm not accepting part of myself, that they are reminding me of my shadows? Yes, no. At the same time, the practice is to assert, like, is to not just be a doormat. I don't know. Do you have a response to that kind of splat of words that I just held there?
Yes, I do. If I encounter a triggering situation, if I can change it, I do. If I can't, I walk away and accept the discomfort that potentially will follow from me walking away. So if I am, let's say, if I'm in the company of someone who is talking, let's say I'm in a group of friends and they bring someone new and they're not, like, they're the energy and the vibe that I don't like, I will take myself away from that person, and even though they're showing parts of myself that I can't live with, there's also comes a choice. Is like, well, do I want to work on it, or do I not want to work on it? Is this the growth that I want to do? I want to do the cold exposure and then just really, and sometimes I do that because it comes a moment of choice. There definitely were situations where I did not want to be in that situation, but instead I chose to stay because it offered opportunity for growth. For example, I really am sensitive to loud noises. And often I just extract myself from the situation, either by wearing earphones, especially when I'm working, or just like changing the environment. Sometimes I choose to grow through this. So if I'm with a friend at a cafe and loud music is playing, I have a choice of either asking to turn down the music, which I have done before. Then interestingly, other people would be like, oh, that is better. Now I do feel better. So it's like being able to notice that. And then on the other hand, sometimes I stay because I was like, well, I want to work on it a little bit more because yes, I am sensitive, but it's also like, it's a bit inconvenient sometimes. It's kind of like staying with an uncomfortable situation, but it's a choice. So the moment the triggering situation occurs, I ask myself, do I want to stay with it and grow with it? Do I have the capacity in me to do so? Or do I walk away? And it's never expecting the other person to change. Accept you for who you are and accept myself for who I am. And I'm choosing to walk away because my inner peace is important to me and I love you. And I don't have to be in the same space with you. And it also then becomes a choice of the other person to respond. If let's say if you're in a relationship and you say that, it's like, if that continues, that behavior continues, I know myself that I'm not going to be able to thrive. And I'm letting you know. And it is up to the other person to say, well, I am as I am. Or they might try to alter the behavior. And they might not even realize that they were doing something that's triggering, that's easy to change. But all the while, knowing that actually I'm 100% committed to walking away from the situation. When I'm saying I will walk away, I will. So it's never a threat. It's like dangled in front of someone. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like it maybe is something along the lines of, it's in my agency is to choose whether I have the capacity to address it. And there's also the opportunity, like in this whole, to relate authentically and then actually shed light on blind spots of the other person as well. That's very nice.
And it's also saying that I'm unable to do, I wish I could because I love you. And I just can't. Not right now. I cannot accept this invitation for growth right now. Maybe later. Maybe we'll meet them later and life is a long song, you never know.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon the connectedness in psychedelics. In the psychedelic studies that you shared, is that there was a relationship between feeling connected when taking psychedelics and feeling less depressed.
This is the study of the connectedness. They actually did the questionnaire on that after the treatment. But then also there's this mystical experiences questionnaire that's given during the acute effects of the compounds. And like I say, it's oceanic boundlessness, which is a word or a term for, like feeling connected, like boundlessly connected with everything. That is the predictor of the therapeutic response afterwards. So it seems like both of those reliable measures are related to of whether someone actually experiences an antidepressant effect or what is clinically measured as antidepressant is yielded from that experience.
So if someone feels more connected, they're less likely to feel depressed.
I see them. I kind of feel like it's literally like they're reflections of the same thing. Disconnection is described as in the terms depression. Like the word depression and disconnected could be literally are describing the same thing, same state. And connectedness is the opposite of that state. What can create a disconnection is those masks that we wear to protect ourselves because of that lack of curiosity, that feeling that there's like a right and a wrong. We probably judge others in the same way that we judge ourselves. So if I'm very judgmental of myself and putting on lots of masks because I don't want other people to see those parts of myself that I feel ashamed of, thereby disconnecting myself from the world in that way, not being able to relate authentically. I'm also probably judging other people and thinking I don't want to relate with them either because I see all of these parts that I don't like. I don't want to be associated with or connect with. I don't even want to connect with that part of myself. And that shift in perspective with the psychedelics may be about seeing that part of myself. Like, for example, with that guy, like seeing the grief. You're not something that is haunting me. You are love.
Right.
Just confused. Trying to express itself and maybe not being embraced.
I actually interviewed someone on grief, a grief counselor.
Okay, amazing.
Podcast. I think I would
please
share.
Yeah.
And those of you watching, you can check it out. All right.
Thank you.
I think it's a very beautiful. I know you have to go. You have a storytelling night where you actually show more artistic side of yourself.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Not that science is not art. I think it is definitely art. So I wish you best of luck both in your event tonight and in your journey to the Amazon. And thank you for your time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm really so grateful that this synchronicity slipped into my awareness.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Really. So cool.
Molly, so in case people have more questions and curious to find out what you do, of course, I'm going to leave the links to your research and to your work below, but how can they connect with you?
Well, please get in touch because I love seeing reflections on this sort of stuff back to me. It's all so illuminating. My Instagram is at mollyth.art. And then I have a LinkedIn, Molly Hickey, and I have a website as well, www.mthickey.art.
I'll leave them all in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone who joined us for today's episode of On Emergence. If you like the podcast, you feel free to share with someone who you might think benefits from it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. If you're watching it on YouTube, and drop me a message on Instagram. You can find me on Emergence on most social media platforms. Thanks to everyone who joined us today, and until the next time.